At exactly 12:45 in the afternoon on a quiet Tuesday, a rupture began 10 kilometers beneath the floor of the Gulf of California. Within seconds, a magnitude 6.0 earthquake tore through the southern end of a narrow arm of sea, separating the Baja California Peninsula from mainland Mexico. On the surface, the immediate feedback was minimal. The United States Geological Survey issued a green alert, projecting negligible casualties and minor structural damage. Across northwestern Mexico, the shaking caused brief alarm, but no tsunami materialized, and the coastal towns soon fell back into their daily rhythms. By nightfall, the global monitoring systems had cataloged the event as a routine offshore adjustment and moved on. But this local assessment obscures a profound geological reality. This was not an isolated, self-contained release of strain. The geographic boundary separating Mexico from the United States is a political convention, completely ignored by the deep architecture of the Earth. In physical terms, this rupture occurred on the southern terminus of a single, continuous plate boundary that carries a far more ominous name to the north, the San Andreas. The true scale of this event is defined by what this fault is mechanically wired into. Hundreds of kilometers to the north, beneath the metropolitan corridors of Southern California, lies a tectonic system housing more than 20 million people. The Tuesday rupture did not strike a relaxed system. It struck at a moment when new analytical models indicate the northern faults are wound tighter and carrying more accumulated stress than at any point in the last 1,000 years. To understand the systemic threat, we must look at the mechanics of the rupture itself. The earthquake occurred at a depth of just 10 kilometers. In seismological terms, depth dictates the raw efficiency of energy transmission. A deep rupture dissipates its force through kilometers of overlying crust, which scatters and absorbs the seismic waves before they reach the surface. A shallow rupture at 10 kilometers delivers its kinetic payload almost entirely undiluted. The only reason this event did not cause widespread destruction is a simple geographic buffer. The open water and distance of the Gulf absorbed the strongest shaking before it could impact populated land. Had this exact shallow rupture occurred directly beneath an inland urban center, the diagnostic report of that Tuesday would be catastrophic. Furthermore, the instruments recorded that this was not a single, clean release. It was a violent multi-shock sequence. Within a 24-hour window, the primary rupture was accompanied by a second near-magnitude 6 shock, two separate 5.3 magnitude events, and a 4.5 magnitude offshore tremor. This cluster is the signature of a boundary actively deforming in real time. Where a whole network of minor faults is failing in rapid succession, as tectonic strain searches for the path of least resistance, the energy from this cluster rippled outward, registering on sensitive instruments thousands of kilometers away. From stations near San Diego and the central San Andreas at Parkfield, all the way to Japan. This wide-reaching signal is a physical confirmation that the energy from this rupture did not remain isolated. It traveled directly along the tectonic conveyor belt that connects the Gulf of California to the heart of the American West. This brings us to the fundamental physical engine driving the system. The boundary between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate is moving continuously. These massive blocks of crust slide past each other at a rate of 45 to 50 millimeters per year, roughly the speed of human fingernail growth. In California, this motion is primarily lateral, a shearing force as the plates grind past one another. But as you follow this boundary south into the Gulf of California, the machinery transforms. Here, the plates are not just sliding, they are actively pulling apart, creating the Gulf of California Rift, a young ocean basin being born. This rift is a staircase of short seafloor spreading centers linked by long, sideways slipping transform faults. Because this entire network operates as a single, integrated tectonic machine, a shift at the southern end cannot occur in a vacuum. Every time the Gulf segments slip and rearrange, The balance of pressure on the locked segments to the north is modified. The lack of a tsunami in this instance is not a sign of weakness, but a diagnostic clue. Tsunamis require vertical displacement, the massive uplift of the water column seen in subduction zones. The Gulf, like the San Andreas, is a transform system where plates slide horizontally. The horizontal shear barely disturbs the water, but it confirms that the Gulf and the San Andreas are the exact same species of geological hazard. We are left with a critical diagnostic puzzle. The southern end of the system has slipped, redistributing its stress northward along the continuous plate boundary. Meanwhile, the locked northern segments under Southern California have spent centuries holding their ground, quietly compressing like a massive spring, banking elastic energy since the last major ruptures. This raises the central systemic question that now confronts geophysicists. How does a shallow, high-energy cluster of ruptures in the Gulf of California redistribute stress along a tectonic chain that is already verified to be at its absolute 1,000-year breaking point? To trace how a distant offshore rupture interacts with the locked systems of the North, geophysicists analyze two physical mechanisms. The first is dynamic triggering, where propagating seismic waves act as transient stress perturbations. For a critically loaded fault, this minute vibration can act as the final tipping point. This is a documented phenomenon. Past Gulf earthquakes have repeatedly triggered immediate swarms in the Imperial Valley. In 1992, the magnitude 7.3 Landers earthquake demonstrated the extreme reach of this mechanism, triggering seismic activity far beyond the zone of direct shaking. The second mechanism is static stress transfer. When the southern end of the plate boundary slips, the release of tension shifts the tectonic load, redistributing weight along the continuous fault system. While the Tuskegee earthquake did not instantly snap the rock beneath Los Angeles, it added a physical increment of pressure to an already overloaded system. That term, overloaded, describes the southern San Andreas and its neighbor, the San Jacinto Fault. Recent geodetic analysis reveals that these two faults have accumulated their highest levels of stress in over 1,000 years. For 10 centuries, the Pacific Plate has maintained its northwestward push, while these locked surfaces have refused to slip, banking immense elastic energy. The southernmost segment of the San Andreas, near the Coachella Valley and the Salton Sea, has not experienced a major rupture since approximately 1680. Given its historical recurrence interval of 180 to 250 years, this segment is centuries past due. No modern city, highway, or population center in California has ever existed on top of a system in this state of advanced loading. While public attention focuses on the San Andreas, specialists monitor the San Jacinto Fault with greater concern. Cutting directly through high-density population centers of the Inland Empire, including Riverside, San Bernardino, and Hemet, it is the most seismically active fault in Southern California, capable of producing magnitude 6 and 7 events directly beneath vital hospitals, freeways, and aqueducts. The ultimate hazard lies at Cajon Pass, a narrow mountain junction north of San Bernardino where these two fault lines converge, carrying Interstate 15, rail lines, and utility corridors. Under normal conditions, this junction acts as an earthquake gate, a structural barrier where a rupture terminates. However, physical modeling demonstrates that when both systems are heavily stressed, this gate can swing open. A rupture starting on the San Jacinto could breach the junction, jumping onto the San Andreas to trigger a massive joint rupture. This is not speculative. Peer-reviewed modeling published in 2016 reconstructed a historical earthquake from 1812 as exactly this kind of joint rupture. Because rupture length dictates magnitude, such a cascade scales up the hazard exponentially. In earthquake physics, each step up the magnitude scale represents a 32-fold increase in released energy, meaning a magnitude 8 is roughly 1,000 times more powerful than a magnitude 6. The Geological Survey modeled the consequences of a magnitude 7.8 rupture on the southern San Andreas in its shakeout scenario, estimating 1,800 deaths, 50,000 injuries, and $200 billion in losses. In the face of these stark physical limits, alternative narratives often emerge, attributing these events to government programs, solar flares, or secret predictions. These claims collapse under physical analysis. The energy of a magnitude 6 rupture dwarfs any artificial source by multiple orders of magnitude, and there is no physical mechanism linking solar activity to the release of deep tectonic strain. The geological agencies do not hide the hazard. They publish these scenarios openly. The reality needs no conspiracy. It is simply the mechanical logic of a plate boundary approaching its breaking point. The Gulf earthquake was not the trigger, but it remains a warning light, reminding us that the fault is loaded and the clock is running. The immediate critical window following the Gulf of California rupture shifts the analytical focus to the near-term observational data. In the days immediately following a magnitude 6.0 event, the laws of seismology dictate that the most mathematically probable path is decay. Typically, 90 to 95% of such seismic sequences are standalone occurrences, with their associated aftershocks gradually losing energy along a predictable power law curve. If this standard decay pattern holds, the immediate local sequence will quietly fade, and this specific geological chapter will draw to a close without further escalations. However, the remaining 5 to 10% margin of probability is what prevents seismologists from dismissing the event. Within this marginal zone lies the potential for foreshock behavior. To determine if the Gulf rupture is a precursor to a larger systemic failure, researchers are closely monitoring the Imperial Valley just north of the Mexican border. This specific stretch of crust acts as the mechanical link between the rifting zones of the Gulf and the shearing zones of Southern California. The primary indicator of a critical escalation would not be subtle. It would manifest as a climbing sequence of seismic events rather than a fading one, or as a localized cluster of fresh activity migrating northward into the Imperial Valley and the Salton Sea. Should new ruptures ignite along these northern transitional segments, it would mean that the tectonic load released in the Gulf is actively propagating into the locked feeder lines of the main San Andreas Fault. This spatial migration of strain is the precise physical signal that would transform a localized Mexican tremor into an immediate regional warning. This reality highlights the true significance of the Tuesday earthquake. It was never about a single afternoon of shaking in Mexico, nor was it a direct trigger for an instant catastrophe. Instead, the event serves as a diagnostic instrument, a physical warning light, flashing at the southern end of a vast and interconnected machine. The entire tectonic boundary, from the seafloor spreading centers of the Gulf, up through the Imperial Fault, the San Jacinto, the San Andreas, and terminating at the Cajon Pass Junction, is a single, integrated mechanical system. When one component of this system moves, the entire structure adjusts. The northern segments of this machine are currently holding back 1,000 years of accumulated plate motion, quietly banking elastic strain beneath the highways, aqueducts, and suburban developments of Southern California. The physical laws of geology guarantee that this strain cannot be stored indefinitely. The locked portions of the southern San Andreas will fail, and the fault will rupture again. Because of this certainty, the debate among specialists has shifted away from the unpredictable variable of timing and toward the manageable variable of preparation. The consensus among structural engineers and disaster planners is clear. The highly populated regions sitting atop these locked faults remain critically underprepared for the scale of energy release that a 1,000-year buildup will inevitably produce. The value of the shallow magnitude 6 earthquake in the Gulf is that T forces a moment of empirical clarity. It strips away the comforting illusion of stability. exposing the structural limits of the modern infrastructure built directly above the plate boundary. It reminds us that we are living on a loaded geological spring, and that the physical systems of the Earth operate on a scale of force that completely ignores human boundaries, political borders, and municipal planning. The southern plate boundary has demonstrated that it is fully active, and the only remaining question is how much of the loaded northern spring will release when the gate finally swings open. The structural integrity of Southern California's entire economic and social framework rests upon a highly complex network of physical dependencies that cross directly over these geological fault lines. While seismologists track the microscopic movements of tectonic plates, structural engineers and disaster coordinators must calculate how these movements translate into physical loads on human infrastructure. The human factor in this crisis is not merely a matter of population density. It is the physical vulnerability of the modern lifelines that sustain daily life. The aqueducts carrying fresh water across the desert, the high-voltage transmission lines supplying power, and the natural gas pipelines that fuel the cities all cross the San Andreas and San Jacinto faults at multiple critical points. A major rupture would sever these arteries instantly, isolating major urban areas from their external resources within the first minutes of an event. This stark physical reality is why the high-stress state of the northern faults is so critical. The accumulation of elastic strain is not an abstract scientific metric. It represents a real, measurable threat to every physical asset in the region. When a fault ruptures, the ground acceleration is determined by how much energy was stored and how quickly it is released. With 1,000 years of accumulated energy waiting to be unleashed, the ground motion could exceed the design limits of many older buildings, bridges, and municipal facilities. This is particularly true in the Inland Empire, where the San Jacinto Fault runs directly beneath densely populated residential zones. Here, the proximity of the fault to the surface means there is no distance buffer to soften the blow, exposing millions of people to the immediate raw energy of the rupture. To understand how the system might fail, we must look closely at the mathematical relationship between rupture length and structural damage. In a standard earthquake scenario, the shaking is localized, allowing regional emergency services to respond effectively. However, in a joint rupture where the earthquake gate at Cajon Pass swings open, the rupture zone could extend for hundreds of kilometers. This massive footprint would trigger a regional catastrophe, overwhelming emergency response capabilities across multiple counties simultaneously. The loss of critical infrastructure at Cajon Pass would shut down major transportation corridors, disrupting the supply chain not only for Southern California, but for the entire nation. This cascading failure pattern is the core focus of modern vulnerability assessments, illustrating that the true scale of a disaster is defined by the interconnectedness of our systems. In the wake of such an overwhelming threat, it is natural for public anxiety to seek out simple explanations or to downplay the danger through various myths. Some look to superficial interpretations that suggest the risk is exaggerated, or that technology will somehow mitigate the worst of the impact. Yet, the physics of tectonic strain cannot be negotiated. No engineering solution can fully insulate a society from the sheer kinetic force of a major plate boundary rupture. The only scientifically sound defense is proactive preparation, retrofitting vulnerable structures, reinforcing critical lifelines, and educating the public on how to respond. The Gulf of California earthquake serves as an objective reminder that the clock is ticking, and the physical limits of our infrastructure are being tested every day by a system that is quietly winding itself to its final breaking point. The physical realities of the Pacific and North American plate boundary demand that we strip away the layers of speculative fiction and unscientific myths that routinely surface in the wake of such seismic events. In the digital age, a moderate earthquake in the Gulf of California quickly generates a parallel wave of misinformation, including claims that these ruptures are engineered by covert government programs, triggered by recent solar flares, or that agencies like the United States Geological Survey are withholding precise, secret predictions of the impending big one. The physical laws of geology and thermodynamics dismantle these narratives instantly. A magnitude 6 earthquake releases an amount of energy that dwarfs any man-made facility or human technology by many orders of magnitude. There is no physical pathway for human engineering to inject such immense energy into the deep crust. Similarly, solar flares, while powerful electromagnetic events, have no physical mechanism to interact with or release the localized tectonic strain stored kilometers beneath the Earth's surface. Furthermore, earthquakes are fundamentally chaotic systems governed by nonlinear mechanics, making precise date and time predictions scientifically impossible. The geological agencies do not hide predictions. Instead, they publish exhaustive, peer-reviewed hazard assessments and worst-case planning scenarios openly, specifically because the real, documented danger requires no exaggeration. The true hazard is not a secret conspiracy, but an observable mechanical system operating under the law of conservation of energy. For more than 3 centuries, the southern segments of the San Andreas Fault and the neighboring San Jacinto Fault have acted as tectonic locks. By preventing the plates from sliding past one another, these faults have functioned as immense kinetic storage devices, absorbing 45 to 50 millimeters of plate motion every single year. The system has quietly banked this energy, winding a 1,000-year elastic spring to its absolute physical limit. This is a system bound by strict structural limits, and the accumulation of stress cannot continue indefinitely. The rock will eventually reach its ultimate shear strength. The friction locking the plates will fail, and the stored energy will be released in a matter of seconds. When that threshold is crossed, the ensuing rupture will test the absolute limits of human engineering and societal readiness. Seismologists and structural engineers have stated plainly that Southern California is not prepared for the inevitable failure of this system. The water aqueducts, transportation corridors, and energy grids that traverse the Cajon Pass are vulnerable to the massive ground displacement that a joint rupture on the San Jacinto and San Andreas faults would produce. The shakeout planning scenario, which models a magnitude 7.8 event on the southern San Andreas, serves as a stark empirical baseline for the regional disruption, predicting widespread infrastructural severances, thousands of casualties, and hundreds of billions of dollars in economic damage. Ultimately, the Tuesday earthquake in the Gulf of California was not the catastrophic event that breaks the locked northern faults, but its deeper value lies in its role as an active diagnostic instrument. It acted as a physical warning light, illuminating the unbroken mechanical continuity of the entire plate boundary, from the deep rifts of Mexico to the high-density urban centers of California. The physical system has signaled its state of extreme loading. The question of the next great rupture is not a matter of speculative probability or calendar predictions, but of basic mechanical certainty. The southern San Andreas will rupture again. The Gulf earthquake did not pull the trigger, but it has mathematically demonstrated that the fault is loaded, leaving human civilization with a temporary, critical window to observe the warning and prepare for the inevitable release.